Alright, so I'm back with another video, and in this video I'm going to be going over a game that I played in 2017, so about 7 years ago. I was either 16 or 17 at the time, and I had not reached my 2000 rating yet. And I was 1864 in this game, playing against a 1993. This was a classical time controlled game, so we had plenty of time. And I think this game does a good job of highlighting one of the sharpest openings in chess, which I've played several times out of the Najdorf Sicilian. And I figured we would just dive right in and see what this game has to offer because it's a pretty interesting one. Okay, so e4 is played, c5, knight f3, d6, all standard Sicilian stuff. After d4, we go for an open Sicilian. C takes d4 is played, knight takes d4, knight f6, targeting this pawn on e4. White defends with knight to c3, and I play a6. This is the characteristic move of the Najdorf Sicilian. And there are a million ways that white can play against this. I think just about every single move has been tried in this position, but my opponent chooses to go for the classical variation or traditional variation with bishop g5. This is one of the more popular moves, not so much as of late, but definitely one of the most aggressive tries against the Najdorf. So I play e6, just looking to move this pawn up so I can play bishop to e7 potentially, or maybe I can control the d5 square with that pawn. So pretty flexible move overall. I haven't committed this knight to d7, haven't committed my queen yet. I still have a lot of flexibility in the setup that I choose. So white plays f4. This is the traditional move, looking to potentially look for a quick e5 break. So generally in this position, black will usually play either knight to d7 to stop this e5 move, or bishop to e7 is probably the most popular move. H6 can also be tried, and there's also queen to b6, which would lead to the poison pawn variation where I try and go after this pawn on b2. But I choose not to play any of those moves, and I play probably the sharpest line that exists in this opening, which is pawn to b5. So this is the Polugaevsky variation, named after Lev Polugaevsky, who popularized this back in the 20th century. He was a famous theoretician, and he created this opening, which is one of the sharpest in chess. And you might be wondering, okay, what happens if pawn to e5 is played? It looks like that would just take advantage of this pin on this knight on f6, and it looks like I'm just going down a piece, but there's a very sneaky idea to avoid this. So white plays e5, d takes e5, f takes e5, and clearly there's an issue here with this pin. It looks like I'm going to be losing a knight, but there's this one sneaky move that I can play, queen to c7. Without this move, this opening would be completely invalid. And in this position, the two moves that I would suggest are e takes f6 and queen to e2. Either defending this pawn or just cashing in and taking this knight. And the whole point of queen c7 is after e takes f6, there's this queen to e5 check, giving check and picking this bishop up. And this leads to a very, very sharp position that has been played many times before. So instead, my opponent goes for bishop takes f6, which is a move that I'm not super familiar with, but I do know that it's not one of the best tries against this opening, so I was feeling a little bit better about my position in this spot. I simply play g takes f6, white plays e takes f6, and I continue and deliver this check on e5. So my queen is very active here. It's very well centralized. White has to figure out how he's going to block this check, and then maybe at the right time I can pick up this pawn. So white plays bishop to e2, and I'm not super interested in taking this pawn yet because white would be able to use this open f file to his advantage and potentially get a very strong attack very quickly. So I opt to not take this pawn as it's a relatively good defender of my king for the time being. So I choose to just leave it there. I play bishop to b7. And white should probably look to play queen d3 and castle queenside. This seems like a pretty reasonable plan. But my opponent chooses to play knight to f3, which I believe is an inaccuracy due to what I play in the game, which is bishop takes f3. So notice you can't take back with the bishop because it's pinned. So white has to take back with the pawn, which is not super desirable. Yes, there's a fully open g file, but I have not committed to castling kingside, so that does not necessarily mean that there's going to be some sort of attack down the g file. Additionally, now that g takes f3 has been played, the f file is no longer semi-open, and I choose to simply take this pawn on f6. So material is equal again, and we have a very, very sharp position, complicated position. I've got a very active queen, and this bishop could be a very good piece on the dark squares. And white's pieces are not quite well coordinated. This knight could be kicked at the right time with b4. This bishop is not really doing a whole lot at the moment other than defending f3, and there are a lot of prospects in this position for black. So knight to e4 is played. I give a check on h4. We do a little bit of a shuffle here, and then after king to e1, I play queen to g2, hitting the rook on h1. I had to think about if there are any dangerous possibilities with knight to f6 or knight to d6. I had to make sure that I would be okay in that case. So white plays knight to f6, and after king to e7, white plays rook to f1 to save this rook on h1. I simply take this pawn on h2. It might be more accurate to play bishop h6 or bishop to g7 just to allow this rook to come out, but I played a little bit too greedy in this position and take this pawn. And my opponent finds a very, very nice move here. And without this move, I think my opponent could find himself in some serious trouble. But he finds a very nice idea here, which is knight to d5 check. So I don't really have much of a choice here. I can't play my king to f6. That square is covered. I can't play to e8 because of knight to c7 check stuff. Or sorry, after king to e8, it would be something along the lines of queen to d4, or he could simply just repeat. And I don't really want to repeat in this position, so that would be undesirable. And obviously I can't go to the d file because there will be discovered checks that are pretty deadly in that case. So I choose to play e takes d5, really the only attempt. Queen takes d5 is played, and it's very obvious that my king is not in a great spot here. So if we take stock of material, I'm currently up a piece, but there's not really any way that I can effectively hold on to that piece. My rook is hit at the moment, and I can't really save it. If I play rook to a7, there's queen to c5 check, picking up my rook. So this rook is pretty much a dead piece. The only other possibility is that I could try knight c6, and after queen takes c6, just try and bring my rook to the game with rook to d8 or something like that. But instead, I choose to activate my bishop. I choose to play bishop to g7 and just continue as is. So in the game, so let's knight d5, e takes d5 is played, queen takes d5, queen to g3 check was played, rook to f2 is played, and then I develop my bishop. I forgot that I inserted this check on g3. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, but instead of playing this knight c6 move, I look to activate my bishop. And in doing so, after queen takes a8, I am giving up an exchange. So I'm currently down a rook for a minor piece, so I have an extra knight. But After rook to e8, I am looking to play king to f8, and I will be having the safer king very shortly. So I definitely have some play here. It might have not been the best way of continuing, but my opponent played a very good sacrifice with knight d5 check, and then continuing it up with this queen takes d5 and with hitting my rook. So I'm still trying to play for a win in this position, and I figured that this exchange sacrifice would offer some opportunities because this bishop is still very strong, and white's king it cannot castle. And if I'm able to get in king f8, I definitely will have the safer king and have some prospects here. So white plays queen e4 check, king f8, queen b4 check, king g8, and now it's clear that I have the safer king here. White plays king to f1. So I think he was scared about some of the possible pins, or he was scared of the pin down the e-file, but I think king f1 might be inferior. I think he should probably go for queen g4 right away and just try and force the queens off the board. But after king f1, I give a check on h3, king g1, and I play knight to c6. So I'm starting to bring my pieces into the game, hit his queen, queen to g4, and now we trade queens because I see that I can play bishop takes b2. And I'm going to be getting my material back because I'm hitting this rook, but I'm also threatening bishop to d4, which will allow me to get my exchange back. And at the end of the day, I will be up a pawn. So rook d1, bishop d4, king f1, bishop takes f2, king takes f2. At the end of the day, I'm up a pawn. It's a rook and knight and a pawn versus rook and bishop. So not an easy conversion, but definitely prospects of winning now that we've reached this position. Knight b4, rook to d6, and I just cash in with this pawn on a2. Maybe rook c8 is a little bit better, but it's really hard to say. I'm really just looking to put my knight on c3. I'll defend b5 and hit this bishop on e2, so this looks like a reasonable possibility. Rook takes a6, knight c3, bishop to f3, and I play rook to d8, looking to play rook to d2 and pick off this c2 pawn. Rook to a8 forces the rooks off the board. Notice this rook is defended by this bishop. So after rook takes a8, bishop takes a8, we have a knight and 3 pawns versus bishop and 2 pawns endgame. The engine currently is reading this as equal, but I think it is much easier to play the side that's up a pawn. Even though white has this good bishop, the knight can be very tricky, and I'm going to start to get my king into the game like this. So king g7, king e3, king g6, king to d2, and I just choose to play b4. This is a useful move because, one, it defends this knight on c3, but also it keeps this pawn on a dark square so it cannot be targeted by this bishop. Bishop to c6 is played. This is an inaccuracy. I think white has to try and play king to d3 and then look to play king c4 and try and take this pawn while I go and try and take this pawn. And I think bishop c6 unfortunately is not the right try. So I play king g5. Bishop to d7 is played, but this unfortunately loses to knight e4 check, and then after the king moves, knight f6, and it's clear I'm going to be picking up another pawn because of this fork. Bishop f5 is tried, and instead of just taking this pawn, I play h5. Undermining this pawn, if g takes h5 is played, I win the bishop, and then if the bishop moves, let's say bishop to c8, I simply take this pawn, and I will be up 2 pawns, and that will be enough to win. So white tries a desperate c4, hoping that I don't know what en passant is, but b takes c3, king d3, h takes g4, bishop to c8 because the bishop was hit, and after g3, bishop b7, king f4, and my opponent throws in the towel because I just have too many pawns. If you play king takes c3, knight e4 check blocks this diagonal and allows me to play g2, and I'll be queening very, very quickly. So after king to f4, my opponent resigns. But I thought this was a very interesting game. Has some good endgame technique at the end, as well as a very sharp opening that led to a very unique position with some interesting sacrifices that led to a very dynamic game. So I thought this was a good game to show. Even though I was only 1864 at the time, I was beating a roughly expert level player in a very, very well played game. So that's going to be all for this video, but I'll see you guys next time.